Charles Kuralt had a knack for reminding America of its human side. The CBS newsman died Friday in New York but left his road trip tales as a legacy. America's most trusted storyteller had a secret that would have destroyed him. Charles Kuralt spent 29 years sending a woman $600,000 while his wife sat at home. He bought land in Montana, paid for college tuition, and signed letters as pop to children who weren't his. CBS viewers saw a gentleman traveling back roads, but behind the scenes, he was living two completely different lives. The truth stayed hidden until the day he died. Then, a letter surfaced that changed everything. Charles Kuralt wasn't really raised in Wilmington, even though he was born there. His mother, Ina, only went there to give birth because it had a hospital. On September 10, 1934, she gave birth to him at James Walker Memorial Hospital. Then she and her husband Wallace took their baby back to her parents' tobacco farm in Onslow County. The farm was 100 acres wide. That's where little Charles spent his early childhood. There was no electricity, no indoor plumbing, and no sink. They drank water from a pump on the porch using a gourd that hung on a nail. Heat came from wood stoves. But Charles didn't complain. He made newspaper kites with flour paste. He tied them with tobacco string and flew them so high above the barn he joked that God could read the headlines. He also carved slingshots from dogwood branches and tickled Venus flytraps with pieces of straw. His family kept moving. First they were in Washington, North Carolina, then Steedman, then Atlanta. Finally, they settled in Charlotte in the mid-1950s, when Wallace Kuralt became head of the Department of Social Services for Mecklenburg County. Every town brought something new, and young Charles became obsessed with radio. At just 14, he started announcing minor league baseball games and hosting a music show on Waze Radio in Charlotte. That same year, he won a local writing contest for a sports story about a dog that interrupted a baseball game. He was attending Alexander Graham Jr. High from 1945 to 1948, and his teacher, Ann Batten, taught him journalism. He wrote a column called The Kaleidoscope for the school paper. Then, something incredible happened. In 1948, when he was still 14, Charles won the National Voice of Democracy contest. Only for people won it that year. He received a $500 scholarship and was flown to Washington, D.C., where he got to meet President Harry S. Truman in the White House. He also delivered his winning speech at Colonial Williamsburg, standing on the same spot where Patrick Henry once shouted, "If this be treason, make the most of it." Charles later said his speech was meant to feel like that same kind of bold American spirit. The contest had only existed since 1946, so he was one of the first winners in the country. This moment showed the world how gifted he already was even before high school ended. His summers were spent working in tobacco fields with his grandparents in Onslow County. He'd collect leaves during harvest season, hand them to someone called a stringer, and those would be tied onto wooden sticks for drying. They'd hang them in log barns. But what he really loved were the 50-mile trips to the tobacco market in Kinston. His grandmother Rena would load up their wagon with cured tobacco, hitch up the mule, and they'd go. During those rides, she'd tell him stories about bandits who robbed farmers coming back from market. She said that's why wagons used to travel with riflemen at the front. Charles would pretend he was guarding them, always watching for make-believe outlaws. These memories became the roots of how he told stories later on TV. He also saw things most white children didn't. Growing up in the segregated South, Charles went to all-white schools, but he could see what was happening to black people. Police in Charlotte were often violent. The local black newspaper, the Charlotte Messenger, wrote about officers beating people in the streets. His father's job as a social worker showed him even more inequality. This all stayed with Charles. Later in life, he never preached politics on TV, but he always made sure to tell stories that gave a voice to people who were often ignored. That was his way of standing up. At Central High School between 1948 and 1951. He wasn't just another student. He was known as the most talented writer in the school. His classmates voted him most likely to succeed in 1951, but he was already succeeding. At 14, he was a radio announcer. That year, he won the Voice of Democracy contest, shook hands with a U.S. president, and earned $500. That would be worth over $5,000 today. He edited the school paper so well that actual reporters started noticing him. He entered the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1951, and his work there was staggering. He majored in history, but also worked for several radio stations, including WNC and WCHL. He covered football and basketball games, made radio documentaries, and kept up his grades. He joined the St. Anthony Hall Literary Fraternity, showing he wasn't just smart with news, he was a thinker, too. His classmates couldn't believe how he managed to do so many things at once. He could write a full script, record it, and then go take a history exam without missing a beat. In 1953, when he was only 19, he worked part-time at Waze Radio in Charlotte. This wasn't a college job. He was doing professional broadcasts, calling baseball games with the same smooth delivery that later made him famous. He spoke like he was sitting next to you in your living room. While others barked out stats, Charles told stories and people loved it. The station got phone calls praising him. Managers couldn't believe he was still just a teenager. But he had something different, a calm voice that made people feel like they were being seen and heard. By 1954, he became editor of the Daily Tar Heel, the student newspaper, and he wasn't afraid of anything. He wrote angry editorials against racial segregation, knowing full well it would upset many people. Some called him a communist. State politicians insulted him publicly. When the university banned alcohol in fraternities, Charles wrote an editorial that simply said, "Pierre, meet Fred," mocking the school's policy by comparing it to a French campaign against wine. He didn't just report the news. He challenged power, and he used wit to do it. In 1955, he graduated from UNC with a degree in history. His family wanted him to go to law school. That would have been the safer choice. But Charles had just won a national award for a radio documentary on North Carolina's past. It was so good that even professionals across the country took notice. His professors were shocked when he turned down law school to chase journalism full-time. It was a big risk. His family wasn't rich. But 2 years later, in 1957, CBS News hired him. He was just 23, and he became the youngest correspondent in the network's history. In 1959, Charles Kuralt moved to CBS headquarters in New York. For him, it was like a dream. His childhood hero, Edward R. Murrow, worked in the same building. After only a week filling in for a writer on Murrow's nightly broadcast, Kuralt was suddenly moved to the television news team. CBS was desperate for fresh on-air talent. Years later, Kuralt admitted it himself. He said they needed on-the-air people badly. At that time, television news was still new and risky. He worked on programs like Dimensions on Health and created short stories about American life. His job required him to write fast, clear radio pieces in the middle of the night. That pressure taught him how to tell strong stories quickly, something that would shape his entire future. By 1960, something unexpected happened. Kuralt, barely 25 years old, became the first host of a primetime series called Eyewitness to History. The show had a new style, and he quickly became the face of it. He helped cover the historic debates between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. That moment changed television forever. A shocking 77 million people watched those debates. That was more than 60% of American adults at the time. A major magazine called Variety praised him, saying he was young, good-looking, full of poise and command. He didn't seem dramatic or fake. He made people feel they could trust him. What made it even more incredible was that he was still learning how to do television while covering one of the most important political events in U.S. history. In 1961, CBS gave him a much bigger challenge. They sent him to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, as their chief Latin American correspondent. He was still in his 20s. His job was to cover 23 countries. The dangers were real. There were street riots, revolutions, and constant fear. One wrong move could mean injury or worse. He had to report from places where governments were falling, and violence was part of the daily news. He stayed in that role until October 1962, right when the Cuban Missile Crisis made the whole region even more unstable. Every report he sent back proved he could handle chaos with calmness. He was becoming more than just a reporter. He was becoming someone people depended on. When he came back to the United States in 1964, the country was changing fast. There were protests, war, and civil rights struggles. Kuralt was right in the middle of it all. His coverage of Vietnam was terrifying. He remembered one assignment where he and his crew followed a group of Vietnamese Rangers. They were ambushed. He said, "Half the company we were with got killed. We were lucky as hell not to get killed." In 1965, he made a Christmas special from Vietnam. In one heartbreaking scene, a soldier was shot right in front of the camera. He also went to Selma, Alabama during the civil rights marches. His quiet way of interviewing people brought out emotions that made people stop and think. He was just in his 30s, but he was already capturing the most dangerous and emotional moments of the decade. By 1967, Kuralt was exhausted. He felt tired of competing with other reporters and trying to chase big stories before someone else did. He wanted something different. He told CBS executives that he needed to get out of the office. His idea was strange. He said, "How about no assignments at all? How about 3 months of just rolling down the Great American Highway just to see what I could see?" His inspiration came from a book by John Steinbeck called Travels with Charlie. At first, CBS didn't take the idea seriously. They thought it was a joke, but one executive gave him a chance. The only condition was to keep the costs low. In fall 1967, Kuralt and cameraman Isidore Blackman set out in a rented motorhome. It wasn't fancy. The seats were dirty. The fridge only had beer and soda, and they lived mostly on peanut butter and crackers. Every morning, they looked at a map and picked a town about 100 miles away. Then they drove. That simple idea became something historic. Over the years, they used 6 different motorhomes and traveled more than 1 million miles. They created 500 segments across 48 states. And with each story, Kuralt found something most news shows had forgotten: kindness, honesty, and meaning in everyday people's lives. The The very first On the Road segment aired on October 27, 1967. It was about a couple named George and June Butler who made maple syrup in Jacksonville, Vermont. George said something beautiful on camera. He said, "You can get color and you can get sound, but you can't get smell. And the aroma is one thing. Maybe it's the osmosis of the sap getting in your system. They didn't do it for money." He said it's the real joy of being in the woods. That story set the tone for the entire series. It was simple, honest, and warm. Viewers fell in love with it. By 1968, they had already traveled 50,000 miles. One unforgettable moment was an interview with a 99-year-old bricklayer in Iowa. He was still working. That story made the ratings jump. People couldn't believe it. Kuralt kept meeting people like that. He interviewed a 104-year-old jogger, a man who lived in a house made of beer bottles, a woman who owned the world's largest ball of string. He once said they found wrestlers and jugglers and mountain climbers, traffic cops, tattoo artists, Gandan day dancers, sheep shearers, bagel bakers, horseshoe players, rodeo riders, sorghum makers, and seashell collectors. Every story felt like a quiet celebration of life. In 1970, the show changed forever when producer Shad Northshield joined them. He brought mobile editing tools. That meant they could now edit their footage on the road instead of going back to New York. It saved time, saved money, and kept the show moving. It was a big breakthrough. Now, they could stay out longer, travel farther, and still meet CBS deadlines. This helped On the Road grow even bigger, and it made Kuralt feel free. Without that upgrade, the series might have ended much sooner.